November 14th, the SBU once again delivered a devastating blow to the nuclear aviation in Crimea. Russia's key airbase in Crimea is currently on fire, experiencing a significant blaze. This is fucked, gentlemen. The entire base exploded, everything is burning. The SBU struck 5 Russian fighter jets at the Saki airfield. It's really scary. The airfields have been blown up. Most importantly, 3 Su-24s, which are nuclear weapon carriers, have been hit. This is just fucking insane. It's a disaster. Everything's gonna burn now. More than 10 impacts. A Su-30SM has been destroyed. Another one has been damaged. An aviation munitions depot has been blown up. The base is engulfed in flames. Evacuation. Panic. The fuel tanks are on fire. Something's burning here too. Something's burning in the river as well. Tens of millions of dollars have been lost. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. It's unbelievable. Ukraine has struck at Russia's nuclear aviation. The SBU carried out the special operation Web 2 and the Saki airfield. A key base of Russian aircraft has exploded and is engulfed in flames. The SBU has once again delivered a devastating blow to Russia's nuclear aviation. No one is allowed near there, not even people. It's useless to try to put it out.
This is an airfield. This isn't a small town, it's an airfield.
Drones attacked the Saki airfield in occupied Crimea, Russia's key airbase for operations over the Black Sea. 5 Russian fighter jets were damaged at the Saki airfield. 1 aircraft was completely destroyed. It's very frightening. We've been told to gather our documents. There might be an evacuation. Shells that are loaded into the planes are exploding. It's unclear how they're lying there in such a chaotic way. Basically, they could fly off in any direction. A Su-30SM was destroyed, another one was damaged, and most importantly, 3 Su-24s, carriers of nuclear weapons, were hit. A series of explosions in occupied Crimea. An aviation munitions depot was blown up. The base is engulfed in flames. There's evacuation, panic, and losses amounting to tens of millions of dollars. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. At the same time, there was a strike on the Frolovo railway station. Arcata is burning. That was a massive hit, guys. Relay cabinets have been destroyed, and traffic has come to a halt. In Sochi, there's a fire at the oil depot in Adler near the airport. It has ceased operations. And what's burning over there?
The airport.
The drone strike deprived the airport of fuel. They hit the oil depot, basically, and once again the garages. Those poor garages got hit again. Flights are being diverted to alternate airfields. In Kurgan, a gas distribution station is on fire, and evacuation is underway. In the USSR, they attacked gas pipelines in Siberia, the Moscow region, and central Russia, including the route to Central Asia. The airports in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, and Tambov are closed. At Pulkovo, hundreds of flight delays. The rashest murderers are praying with priests. You remember, only the sound of bells can save you from drones. Church bells. There are 300-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean Bridge. Manual inspections take up to 7 hours. The FSB is jamming internet connections. Russia is in a logistical dead end. This is no longer defense, this is an offensive. Ukraine is striking accurately and systematically, and effectively. Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan right now.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health.
Roman Lvovich, the top event. The SBU special operation, a strike on Russia's nuclear aviation. We attacked more than 5 aircraft. Tell us more about this.
The security service has a special center located there that is responsible for dealing with long-range strategic drones. They attacked Saki. I see we've talked about Saki with you several times already. Novofedorivka is nearby. It's the main depot supporting Russia's naval aviation. But the aircraft themselves are stationed specifically at Saki. It's a naval aviation airfield. Naturally, there are Su-24s, Su-30s, and some helicopters there, which, by the way, were supposed to intercept these drones but failed to do so. As Army Aviation sometimes reports to Putin, the commander just couldn't do it. So that's the kind of bad luck that happened. 5 aircraft were damaged, 1 was destroyed. One of the 5 was destroyed. A Su-30 was completely lost. Another Su-30 was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were also damaged. They really can also be carriers of nuclear weapons.
Roman Igorovich, the SBU, struck 5 fighter jets at the Saki airfield. A Su-30SM was destroyed and another one was damaged. 3 Su-24 aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads were destroyed. An aviation munitions depot was blown up. Saki is Russia's key airbase on the Black Sea. It has been put out of commission. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's nuclear threats and the 2 nuclear submarines that are approaching Russia or have already approached, the fact that we are once again attacking nuclear-capable aircraft in occupied Crimea is an important signal overall.
Su-30, Su-24, even a frontline bomber, tactical aviation, but nevertheless, it can carry nuclear weapons. So if that's the case, it means this is a parallel strike. A parallel strike along with at least informational pressure on Russia from the United States. Why informational? Because, for example, in the information flow, giving the order for 2 submarines to head to the Russian shores, in reality, that doesn't really mean much. Why? Because, first of all, some submarines are already near the Russian shores anyway, and submarines are like gophers. You can't see them, but they're there. And when it's announced, for example, when Trump says that 2 submarines are heading somewhere, they're actually not there anymore. In other words, they're already in position, already prepared. It's a way to apply pressure for certain decisions to be made, and also an attempt to rein in Medvedev's rhetoric. Lately, he's been having problems with his tongue. It's gotten too long. He needs a canning machine or a lip rolling machine or maybe a tongue rolling machine, or just cut it off right to the very root. So most likely Trump is trying to do this to pressure Putin so that he trims Medvedev's tongue a bit, because joking about nukes the way Medvedev did, joked in quotes, is absolutely unacceptable, especially since the Americans in this regard have a pretty serious number of nuclear warheads, about 5,500, and that's just the ones publicly known. And delivery systems, including submarines, they have plenty of missiles there as well. A salvo from just 2 of those submarines that Trump mentioned would be enough to make people forget about Russia for the next 30 years. So, in principle, that's actually not a bad idea, by the way.
The attack on the Saki base. Is this a tactical or strategic failure for Russia? What does this mean for us? In other words, by doing this, we are demonstrating our strength and preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula, because it's been a long time since we powerfully attacked airfields in Crimea, and there haven't been such serious losses. What do you think?
They tried to get through. Well, there were a few strikes on the airfields. Actually, there were several hits here. We remember the strike on Engels as well. The SBU did a good job. When they gather a sufficient number of drones, they can spend a long time gathering them. So after that, there is specific target designation and good execution of tasks like this time. Saki is located in Crimea. It's in Western Crimea. Basically, it's in the southwestern part of Crimea. So basically, from a targeting perspective, it's a pretty good and, in principle, an easy target for us. Why? Because approaching from the sea allows you to take out a large number of military facilities. So the question you ask is a good one. Why hasn't it happened before? Why hasn't it happened until now? So let's not get our hopes up just yet so we don't end up disappointed later. But if there is systematic work done on the Crimean airfields, there are 5 of them that the Russians use, then believe me, the Russians will lose at least 15 to 20% of their tactical and army aviation, including helicopters stationed there. Well, let's see. We'll keep asking for an encore every day from Malyuk so that he keeps repeating it over and over.
Roman Lvovich, a 40-kilometer traffic jam on the Kerch, or rather the Crimean Bridge. What does that indicate? As I understand it, there are manual inspections taking up to 7 hours, according to Krimsky Vetor. Russia is simply in some kind of logistical dead end.
Let me clarify a bit, if you don't mind. The Crimean Bridge is in Moscow. If they have a traffic jam from Moscow all the way to the Kerch Bridge, believe me, that's not a 7-hour jam. That's a 777-hour jam. It's a very big question whether they'll even make it through. The Kerch Bridge, which at the moment, well, it's not exactly closed, but there is very strict control over entry and exit right now. And now they're trying to get in. Russians are trying to somehow get through after the carpet mode, after the destruction of some aviation fuel storage facilities. Some are trying on foot, some by car. They're trying to get to Crimea. Naturally, this is causing a traffic jam, and I don't think the jam will clear up. It won't clear up until September. It'll just keep building up. They have no other options. Well, there is another option. They could go relax at the Caspian or to the Aral if it hasn't completely dried up yet.
Dear viewers, please like this video, leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from, as well as your thoughts on how Ukraine's armament. The SBU and other special services are attacking occupied Crimea, targeting military facilities, airfields, aircraft, and the enemy. Let's move on to block number 2. Strikes on logistics and infrastructure. A strike on the Frolovo railway junction, the Arkeda station, is on fire. What's happening with the railway junctions and logistics? I looked at the Voronezh, Rostov regions, and the Moscow suburbs. We are attacking railway junctions and military trains. They're burning, fuel tanks included. Roman Georgievich, the floor is yours.
Well, right now, there are mainly 2 railway junctions that are very important for us to stop or at least slow down. These are the Volgograd and Rostov junctions. And over the past 2 weeks, our defense forces' long-range strike capabilities have been hitting exactly these 2 junctions. This is the right move because most of the fuel goes through them, and through the Volgograd junction, fuel and ammunition from Tatarstan are transported. Equipment also comes from the Urals. Then several supply chains converge at the Rostov railway junction. There the flows are redistributed either to Melitopol or to Tokmak, to Mariupol, to Berdyansk, to Donetsk, to Volnovakha, and to Luhansk as well. All of this goes through Rostov. That's why it's very important for us now, the second wave. And now it's already started, the second wave of the Russian summer offensive, to stop it deep in the rear. And disabling those same traction substations, thermal power plants, balancing capacities, taking out high voltage power lines that supply the railway is very important for us. Why? Because even if there's a delay of just a few hours, the entire delivery schedule gets disrupted. There are certain issues related to loading and unloading, to income, to certain tracks, for example, and all of this gets disrupted for the Russians. And we can use long-range strikes for this, but they absolutely need to be scaled up and carried out systematically, just like strikes on oil refineries and airfields. And then, in principle, it would be possible to delay the Russian troops' advance by at least 30%.
Oil depots in Sochi have been hit. The airport is not operating at full capacity. Rosneft, massive explosions. Roman Nikolaevich, we are now gradually starting to attack both oil depots and refineries in remote regions. To what extent is this a systematic strategy at the moment for destabilizing the supply across all of Russia?
Well, right now this system is visible. The main thing is not to abandon it. This has happened so many times already. Last year, our GUR and security service, the drone forces, started destroying the Russian oil industry. And as if by magic, in May, they stopped. This year, they also started the destruction from the very beginning of the year. They were making pretty good progress, but in March, they stopped. So now we could also pick up the same pace. Basically, if we don't slow down, if, as you rightly said, there's consistency, then by the end of the year, we could cut out at least a third, maybe even half of the Russian oil industry. Our long-range strike capabilities can, in principle, easily take out all Russian oil refineries, plus oil terminals, and even the Druzhba pipeline, which passes 40 kilometers north of Semenovka. So we have this capability. The main thing is that it isn't stopped, now. There have already been several strikes on Sochi on that base. Why are strikes being carried out specifically on this base? Well, it's kind of a base, but actually it's the fuel and lubricants depot at the Sochi airfield. There's mainly a large amount of aviation kerosene stored there, which is also used to refuel Russian army aviation. Those are the helicopters that intercept our drones. So these are military targets. For us, these are purely military facilities. The fact that they have military aircraft stationed at the civilian airfield is frankly their problem. For us, it's a military target because as soon as the opportunity arises, that aviation kerosene gets taken out. Although in reality, it could be taken out even at the refinery. It's not like it just appears out of nowhere from the fourth dimension in their tanks. So now they've set fire to a 2,000. In other words, that's a significant fuel storage tank. It alone will take several months to restore, just that one tank, and God willing, more will burn. There are at least several of them there. So if the strikes don't stop, I'll say it again, by the end of the year, the Russians will have a major problem with fuel.
A strike on the gas distribution station in Kurgan, gas pipelines in Siberia in the Moscow region, and those heading towards Central Asia are under attack. These are people who care. Who is doing this, Roman Igoric, and how important are these strikes on the energy sector today, especially on gas? And again, can these strikes destabilize the supply to all of Central Russia right now?
Well, judging by the geography and the number of gas distribution stations destroyed recently, and by the way, these gas distribution stations are being destroyed near military facilities. So in other words, it either serves military facilities or supplies them. And our people who care are definitely behind this. This is their work. Because essentially you could set a gas distribution station on fire with just a match. And this stops an entire production cycle if it's a military production facility, or it disrupts certain vital functions of a military facility if it's a non-production military site, but still a military one nonetheless. That's why, of course, we will support such actions. And a big thank you to those who care enough not to spare a match. On the one hand, to somehow ease the plight of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people by stopping Russian hydrocarbons. That's not a bad move if we're talking about gas distribution stations. But when it comes to entire gas transit routes, like the Turkmen gas you're mentioning now, in other words, the main gas pipelines, the operation to stop them is much more complicated. But nevertheless, it's possible. I think it's our concerned citizens who know exactly what they're doing. These are local residents, after all. This pipeline comes from Turkmenistan, passes through Kazakhstan. It's a pretty big, long pipeline. And in principle, any local resident could stop an entire main gas pipeline. And that's why these concerned citizens are, you could say, practically our second army. And there are already at least hundreds, if not thousands, of these concerned citizens.
Roman Nikolaevich, over the past 2 weeks, we've attacked the Leningrad region 3 times already. What exactly is being targeted? Because once again, Pulkovo airport was shut down and remained closed for quite a while. There was a cover plan, a drone attack. Previously, we didn't really attack the Leningrad region. Most of the attacks were in the Moscow region. If we're talking about the major key cities in Russia, that's St. Petersburg and Moscow. But now, especially after the so-called celebration of the Russian Navy, in quotes, on Sunday when it took place, we've started actively attacking the Leningrad region.
Well, it's 1,000 kilometers away. The thing is, that's quite a significant distance. Even the same Lyuty and Bobry drones might simply not make it that far. So you need to send pretty serious devices there, almost at the level of an airplane. But nevertheless, as I understand it, we do have them. Not in large numbers, admittedly, but we have them and there's room for growth. Well, first of all, the service begins. This is a specific terminal for transferring various types of fuel, gas, oil, and so on, all the way to Lenin and Murmansk. If we're talking about that direction, at least to the north, there are a sufficient number of military facilities there that our long-range drones will be reaching. But these are already strategic drones, heavy drones, well, from the point of view of the general classification of drones, heavy strategic drones for which 1,000 kilometers is not a long distance.
Next, we have another segment prepared about the panic in Russia's rear areas. First of all, without a doubt, there are flight delays all over Russia, an aviation collapse that is costing Russia hundreds of millions of dollars. The FSB is jamming communications. A very important point is that regional governors are coming out and saying, Russians, please be patient for a while, we'll be without communication, without internet. I read that already in 5 regions. 5 governors have made such statements. The FSB is holding meetings. Putin is summoning the Minister of Transport for a dressing down because logistics are being disrupted. Again, there are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean bridge, inspections lasting up to 7 hours and not just there, flight delays, chaos, everything is falling apart. There is panic among civilians. Do you think we can call this a managed crisis in the rear of the Russian Federation? And how long can Russia withstand this level of chaos?
Well, it's hardly being managed exactly. In other words, this is an attempt to create chaos. And as for how to manage that chaos, the Russians will figure it out themselves, because in some areas they have competent leaders, and in others they have completely clueless ones who sometimes even end up jumping out of windows, screaming and swearing, "Why did you throw me out?" Nevertheless, everyone saw this perfectly well, and understands how the Russian special services handle these kinds of issues. So this chaos, which in the end, at the very least, hits Russia's economy, because, for example, any kind of air transportation or railway transportation, they operate on a specific schedule, and if that schedule is disrupted in one place, it practically shuts down the entire profit-making mechanism along the whole chain, or at the very least, even leads to losses as such. That's why this may not be our direct action, not exactly direct. But it's a side reaction and a side effect that inevitably comes from using our military drones against Russian military targets. And at the same time, naturally, any Russian mechanisms of movement are coming to a halt for various reasons, one of which is at least presumably the infliction of damage. So let it be. Basically, if it keeps shaking, eventually it will shake itself apart and collapse. After all, the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation at this point is a colossus with feet of clay. Russia's feet of clay are its economy. And as soon as the economy is undermined, this colossus will collapse. It will crumble just as the Soviet Union once did, for the very same reason, an economic one. So the more chaos there is, even uncontrolled chaos for all I care, the main thing is that it leads to the collapse of the Russian Empire.
Roman Egorovich, the USA, Trump, and nuclear signals. So, once again, we absolutely need to discuss this with you. Donald Trump has announced the readiness of the US nuclear submarines. And in general, he is ready for nuclear war. This is a very serious statement. I don't know how much of it is just empty talk, because when Donald Trump makes such statements that the US is ready for nuclear war, what kind of consequences should we expect after those words? Peskov responds, in a nuclear war, there are no winners. The Kremlin has sharply changed its tone from threats to justifications. And here's the question. Is this a political game or is it a real signal from the US? What should we be preparing for? And why did Moscow change its rhetoric? Well,
the thing is, Medvedev went overboard. We've already talked about this before. Medvedev went too far, provoking Trump in this regard, and Trump got tired of it. After all, he's so impulsive. And in the morning, most likely, he got up on the wrong side of the bed and naturally started swinging his saber. He sent 2 submarines to the shores of Russia, though no one told him that they were already off the Russian coast. They said, that's it, they're on their way. They're on their way to carry out a combat mission. After all, submarines are considered to be one of the main components or branches of the American nuclear triad, which play a crucial strategic role in national defense. Naturally, just the movement itself in this direction puts pressure on Russia. It's clear that Medvedev has now been pushed under the baseboard somewhere. He won't be yapping for a while, but this whole topic definitely needs to be played out. That's why Peskov and maybe even Putin had to squirm a bit, but mainly Peskov. Now, most likely that tired old horse will have to come out on stage. He'll also put in his 2 cents. I mean, Lavrov. So they'll play it out, calm Trump down in terms of actions regarding Medvedev. They probably won't bring up Medvedev and nuclear weapons anymore. Or there won't be any reason to, or at least they'll explain that there's no need to do it.
In your personal view, how much of a deterrent force do you believe the United States Navy represents at this point in time?
Well, the US Navy is, of course, the largest, but it does have certain problems right now, real problems. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be restructured in some areas. Why? Because everyone now clearly understands that drones, not just aerial, but also underwater and surface drones, are a major problem for any navy at all. And now all the fleets of the whole world will have to solve this problem. And those who don't have a fleet will rub their hands, realizing that they did the right thing by not investing, so to speak. Once upon a time, someone remembers there is also Raikin when he had such an interesting reprise about dinosaurs. He once said, where are these dinosaurs? Where are these 6-story fools? They've all disappeared over time, but the bedbug survived. So now it's exactly the same situation here. Now all these 6-story fools, meaning the fleet, are a very good target for small, inexpensive means of destruction of various types and levels. That's why they either need to be completely rebuilt, for example, strengthening carrier groups with certain mechanisms, or for instance, hiding them, just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet is doing now. They've simply hidden away, started behaving like bedbugs, tucked themselves under the baseboards in Novorossiysk, and are sitting there quietly. Rarely, when they do come out, it's mostly submarines trying to fire off 4-caliber missiles. That's it. That's basically how it works. And now the United States, of course, has a very serious advantage. They'll be thinking about what to do with it. The only way to use the fleet is the carrier fleet, meaning aircraft carriers, which can be properly protected on one side, even just by distance, and allow planes or missiles to take off and carry out their combat missions. But these strategies are now being reworked by the Pentagon. Maria?
Egorovich, there's a very interesting idea here. It appeared in the text of the information, it appeared in the information space that the tsunami in Kamchatka, then the volcanic eruption in Kamchatka, but at the beginning, the tsunami was actually a test. Some believe that these were failed Russian tests, while others say it was the Americans conducting tests. And accordingly, as a result, there was the tsunami in Kamchatka, and moreover, information appeared that appear, or something more than appear, at the Russian Federation's nuclear submarine bases was damaged. To what extent do you, as a military analyst, how can you analyze this information and how likely is it to be true?
Well, it's unlikely to be external interference. Highly unlikely. Why? Because first of all, Kamchatka is a fault line, or rather not exactly a fault, but an overthrust. It's a serious seismic zone. You'd have to be completely brainless to build submarine bases there with nuclear weapons. Well, that's the Russians for you. They got it a bit wrong, not where it was needed, somewhere in the wrong place. There are serious earthquakes there naturally, and tsunamis are one of the consequences of earthquakes as well as volcanic eruptions. So that's the general picture, and any external interference with seismic centers would have already been detected. That's why it's unlikely to be some kind of external pressure. But as for the same office, meaning the divine office, it could have intervened. It could have intervened and put the Russians in their place a bit, because there's been too much suffering lately. Too many curses have been cast upon Russian heads. And in the end, yes, the Heavenly Office records all of this, and then some decision is made and the slab is moved, so to speak. It's unlikely that the Americans could have, Roman Grigorievich.
I've prepared an important topic for the finale: the new command of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. President Zelensky has appointed Anatoly Krivonoshko as the new commander of the Air Force of Ukraine. Before this, he spent a year serving as the acting head, focusing on strengthening the air component, especially air defense and drones. In your opinion, what will this appointment change, even before Yuri? Can we expect a tougher approach in the skies?
The appointment has been in place for a year already. First of all, the right decision was made a year ago. For about a year before this appointment, we kept saying that the head of the Air Force, that is the commander-in-chief, absolutely had to be a pilot. So they listened. Yes, they listened, though only after we lost our heroic pilot in the 16th. They listened. Yes, they made a change. Again, they appointed an acting commander, and for a year they observed how a pilot could handle the job with the air defense system, and it was decided that pilots really can handle it. Moreover, now the air component is becoming the main focus, even within the air defense system, not to mention certain offensive aspects. Therefore, naturally, after the decision was made, a real appointment was made, and it was specifically a pilot who became the commander-in-chief. Now, the question is about the next steps. In other words, simply replacing the commander with a pilot, or rather appointing a pilot as commander-in-chief, is not enough. We need to restructure our entire Air Force system to fit the flight mission. That is, all heads of the air defense command posts, all heads along the management vertical, at least as far as the air forces are concerned, should be pilots. This is very important. So right now, at this moment, this is only half the job. It's only half the job. We need to see it through to the end and replace the entire vertical structure in the air forces with pilots. Only then can we say that our air forces will be not just a serious defensive mechanism, but also a formidable offensive one, which is exactly what they should be. Because in the third millennium, the air component is the main paradigm for carrying out offensive operations. Roman Grigorievich, should we expect transfers from our allies? Still, as for JASSM missiles, Taurus missiles, other missiles, and Tomahawks, of course, ultimately, well, Tomahawks are probably unlikely. After all, only the Typhoons can be used as launch platforms for us. Although a few Tomahawks could be used purely for demonstration purposes, nothing more. But I'll repeat once again, we have no way to launch them. It's either submarines with torpedo tubes or vertical launch systems on submarines, like the Mk-45. There are such silos launch systems, or a ship-based launcher, the Mk-41, which has 64 silos. But launching it from a ship, well, it's unlikely anyone would give us a ship. And for example, burying it here like they did in Deveselu, Romania, and in Poland, is too lengthy a process just to launch Tomahawks. So there's only one option left, the Typhoon launchers, or sometimes called Typhon, depends on the translation. So about the Typhoon launchers, first of all, there aren't that many of them, and theoretically, purely theoretically, they could of course give us Tomahawks, but I'll repeat again, it would be purely for show, just to scare. There's more hope for our own ballistic missiles. We can produce them. The real question is for the authorities. Where have they been for the past 7 years? But for example, when it comes to JASSMs and Taurus missiles, there's definitely more hope here because on their own, and with the F-16S, these are cruise missile carriers. And the main thing at this stage, at least given the reality of the enemy's strong air defense and their sufficient number of surface-to-air missile systems and aircraft, the optimal use of the F-16s is precisely as a launch platform for JASSMs. JASSM missiles have a range from 370 to 980 kilometers. So again, logic suggests that we should get them. Therefore, well, all we can do is wait for them, at least for now. Let's see what Trump does, which foot he gets up on and where. Because when it comes to the JASSM issue, it's definitely Trump who has to make the decision. Well, or will, if it comes to that. And as for the Taurus issue, that's a matter for Merz and Germany, of course. But again, there's still a connection to the Americans there. Why? Because the Taurus is a missile that flies at extremely low altitudes, always using the so-called digital terrain map, which at the moment only the Americans have. So without transferring the digital terrain map, this missile would be an easy target at higher altitudes and would not accomplish its combat mission. So again, everything is tied to the Americans in every respect. So we'll be waiting on Trump, who might get up on the wrong side of the bed. Dear audience, please like this video and leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments. Roman Yegorovich and I work together several times a week, definitely more than 3 times. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from. Share your location and write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine. The well-known military analyst Roman Sveta. Roman Yegorovich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Wednesday. Goodbye.